Good evening. Welcome. Please take your seats. We're about to get started. Thank you. Hi, my name is Sebastian Burke. I'm the Director of Corporate Programs at the Chicago Council. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to get a fantastic audience tonight, despite the weather, to welcome Dr. Cheng Li to our platform. His new book, Chinese Politics in the Xi Jinping Era, will be available for signing and purchase after the event over there. This is the first event in our fall series on China's changing landscape. And in the next few weeks, we will host a variety of other programs on this topic. First, the two leading Asia advisors to President Obama and Second Bush, in conversation with Evan Feigenbaum from the Paulson Institute, will speak on how the next president should deal with China. And a few days later, we will host Kurt Campbell, the former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, on China's global economic ambitions. I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Dover Corporation, for their continued support of this important series at the Council. Thank you. Thank Dover Corporation. For nearly a century, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs has provided an independent, nonpartisan platform for a variety of different voices to promote deeper global understanding and active U.S. engagement in the world. We convene leading global voices, conduct independent research, and engage the public in the discourse on critical global issues. The views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. This fall, our programming will focus mostly on the issues relevant to the U.S. presidential election. It's a very important election. And here are some highlights from our upcoming programs. On October 18, we will welcome Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, on America's indispensable role in the global fight for freedom. On October 24th, we will host a half-day symposium on the rise of populism around the world. And on November 1st, Gary Hufbauer from the Peterson Institute of International Economics and our own Phil Levy, right here in the audience, our senior fellow on the global economy, will analyze the trade agendas of the two major party candidates and their impact. We have many other programs, so please check our website. And if you're not a council member, please consider joining. And to encourage you to do that, today we have a special promotion. If you join or upgrade, you receive a complimentary copy of Dr. Li's book. So if you're interested, please speak to my colleagues in the back. Before we begin, a few housekeeping remarks. Please note that this event is on the record, so feel free to use social media, and we are also live streaming, and the video will be available online afterward. But please remember to silence your phones. I'll return to the stage to moderate the Q&A. But before, I'd like to welcome to the stage to introduce our speaker, Mr. Thomas O'Toole. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of United Airlines and a friend of the Council. So please join me in welcoming Thomas O'Toole.
Good evening. As was mentioned, my name is Tom O'Toole of United Airlines. And on behalf of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, it is a pleasure to welcome you here this evening for what promises to be a very timely and insightful discussion. We are delighted to welcome Cheng Li to the Council platform this evening to share his views on the upcoming leadership transitions in both the United States and China. The U.S. presidential elections are imminent, less than a month away now, and as a result, U.S.-China relations now face a critical turning point as the respective major party candidates advocate quite different paths for our relationship with China. Then next year, China will face its own leadership transition at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party. And it is expected that the likely result is the largest turnover in over 40 years in the composition of the Central Committee, the political body that comprises the top leaders of the Communist Party in China. So both countries are facing critical leadership transitions that will impact the relationship between the United States and China. So what are the most important issues and the implications of these leadership transitions on both sides? It will be very engaging to hear Dr. Cheng Li comment on both of the leadership transitions. Before we begin, let me just elaborate on briefly introducing our speaker. Cheng Li is the director of the John L. Thornton China Center at the Debunking Institution. He also serves as a senior fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution and director of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. Previously, he was the William R. Kennan Professor at Hamilton College, as well as a residential fellow of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He is a frequent media commentator. His views are frequently sought out by CNN, the BBC, and his writings appear regularly in The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and other global publications. And so with that, it's a pleasure to welcome Cheng Li for his comments on both leadership transitions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for that overly generous introduction. I'm really honored to speak to this wonderful audience, especially a raining day. And I want to applaud the Chicago Council on Global Affairs for hosting this very timely event. Certainly, I want to echo what Tom said. These two events, the US presidential election in less than 1 month, and China's Party Congress in roughly about a year from now, are both enormously consequential events. This US election reminds us, more so than at any other point in recent 4 decades, that no political system is perfect. And the political system, any political system, can be profoundly flawed. The United States is in a crucial conjunction in its soft power development, both internationally and domestically. China, on the other hand, now has more influence on the global economy and regional security than at any other point in modern history. But at the same time, China is also struggling to fix its fundamental deficiencies in its political system. China's political trajectory, especially how domestic factors shape China's foreign affairs or foreign policies, should be everyone's concern. Of course, there are many important differences. For the US system, it's very transparent. Our political campaign is very long and expensive, sometimes getting very vicious. And the electoral college system, despite some problems, largely works, in my view. And also, the bipartisan politics sounds like it will be with us for many years to come, although the Republican Party probably needs to do some work. But the system, I think, largely sustained. Chinese political system, as we frequently use the term, very opaque. And political campaign in China is largely a taboo, with the exception 4 or 5 years ago, Bo Xilai launched a political campaign that was quite unique, extraordinary in CCP history. But it was interesting. And also we use the term black box manipulation to explain the Chinese high politics, Chinese elite politics, how Zhongnanhai decide personnel and etc. Zhongnanhai is a headquarters, just like White House, and maybe it's not an appropriate comparison, but anyway, it's where power lies. Of course, we are not in a complete dark. You talk to taxi drivers in major cities, they will tell you a lot of stories about which leader belonged to which faction, and the many interesting stories. And the last 4 years, you also heard one scandal after another. They all become public domain. Start with Bo Xilai, and then Zhou Yongkang, then Lin Jihua, and the two highest ranking military officers. And also that my book actually is quite long. Originally, it's 600 pages. Now becomes 500 pages. Actually, I refused to cut. So eventually, the publisher just reduced the funds, to make it not so overwhelming. The book has about 200 new terms, 84 tables and charts, and over 600 Chinese officials. Probably among them, 500 are current officials, and they are discussed or mentioned. So it's really a lot of information, and you probably will find that there's far more information than we imagined. And the upcoming 19th Party Congress, as Tom mentioned, will likely witness a major leadership turnover. 70% members of the Central Committee, this is the 376 members. They consist of governors, ministers, provincial party secretary, senior military officers, and their deputies. This most powerful organization, just below Power Bureau, and certainly the very top is Power Bureau Standing Committee. But this is third tier. There will be 70% of change. And on the top, the 7 people of the Standing Committee, 5 will retire. In terms of 70% of the Central Committee change, this is indeed the largest since 1969 at the so-called 9th Party Congress during the Cultural Revolution. Now, but this is not entirely unique. On average, in the past 3 decades, on average, the turnover rate every 5 years in the Central Committee is 62%. So this is very ironic. China is not a democracy. We are democracy. But China's turnover rate of the top elites is much faster than many democratic countries such as ours. Now, also ironically, the media in China really extensively cover US election. The presidential debate were aired in the past 3 times, including vice president debate. Not only aired live, but in several channels is simultaneously translated into Chinese. We do not have reliable number how many people watch, but China's social media, there's so many information about the US presidential election. And also Chinese will not miss the point that the election will have a huge impact on China's relationship with the United States and China's economic development and also China's own security. Now, there's different kind of interpretation or articles or surveys. I'm very cynical, think that the Chinese usually like one candidate rather than the other. My view and my observation is China is divided very much like us. Which candidates China prefer largely depend on what worldviews Chinese intellectuals or leaders or general public, what worldviews you hold. If you think US-China relations is zero-sum game, you know that what leader they will choose. If you wanted to maintain the international order, they probably lean towards another. Or continuities, they will lean towards another candidate. But it's constantly changing. That also reflects the dynamic development in China. But on the other hand, our media coverage of China, despite occasionally this article by Financial Times, by New York Times, and not so much attention on Chinese leadership. Our knowledge, American public knowledge of China, is extremely limited. And just give you one example, G20 meeting a month ago, our mainstream media obsessed with the story of aircraft ways, the stairs. I mean, this is one after another, TVs and the talk shows and the major newspapers talk about that issue. Sounds like Obama was humiliated. The Chinese even did not give him red carpet. They just want to embarrass him, humiliate him one of our president candidates even said that if I were him, I would immediately return to the United States, But the reality is, it's not true at all. White House immediately explained, it's our choice. We wanted to go with the back in a small door. There was a red carpet, and Obama said repeatedly that he received tremendous respect by Chinese hosts. Just to give you one example, on average, the leaders or the 20 members of the 20 head of states in the G20 meeting, plus some of the other head of states, on average, each of them just had a 20 minutes meeting with President Xi Jinping. But President Obama had 6 hours extensive dialogue with China's leader. Now, of course, this may not be that important enough, but I think this certainly reflects, China pay great attention to U.S.-China relation, and China certainly does not want to humiliate the president. That's not the way Chinese does. So again, our media is so mistorted, really quite narrow-minded. Now, here I would like to emphasize the major power relations are very, very crucial for the American leadership. But unfortunately, so far, the presidential debate, China, Russia, really marginally mentioned. And in these, so far, the 3 debates. I would say that how to deal with China's rise constitutes one of the biggest of foreign policy challenges for the next administration. But unfortunately, there's not so much serious discussion or strategic thinking. I hope that your foreign guests like Kurt Campbell and Evan could really provide us some clues. I think it's really it's very, very important. Now, in my next 25 or 30 minutes, I want to focus on China because that is where my expertise lies, and also this issue has largely been overlooked. I particularly want to make 3 points. Number 1, to challenge some conventional wisdom, especially what I call two extreme views in the American thinking of Xi Jinping. Number 2, I want to share with you my understanding and assessment of Xi Jinping. And thirdly, I want to share with you my argument about the status and the outlook of the so-called Chinese collective leadership or China's political institutionalization. So really, as my subtitle of my book mentioned, it's really individual versus institution. It's very much in the text. Now, first, about two extreme views. Unfortunately, they dominated the U.S. discourse about China, especially our thinking of Xi Jinping. On one extreme is the belief that Xi Jinping is a strong man who has completely replaced the collective leadership and is monopolizing power. So you see so many covers by Time Magazine and maybe Newsweek and The Economist and etc. Xi Jinping looked like an emperor, new emperor, right? He is an ambitious leader who has helped realize China's military modernization, according to this view, which will enable China to dislodge the United States from the Asia Pacific and cement its own regional hegemony. And also Xi Jinping may even bring back Cultural Revolution, and as he will become a Mao-like figure, according to this extreme view. Under this scenario, the US policy approach is to contain China before it's too late. At the other extreme is the view that Xi Jinping is very weak. His anti-corruption campaign and military reform really have alienated many elites in China and created numerous enemies. This view perceives Xi Jinping's grip on power and also deduces that the Chinese Communist Party itself is really imperial. It's in big trouble, Communist Party. Not only Xi Jinping is in trouble, but Communist Party itself in big trouble. If forces seek to push aside Xi Jinping, the thinking goes, the days of the Chinese Communist Party rule could be numbered. Now, ironically, the view of a weak Xi actually reaches the same policy recommendation as the view of a strong Xi. The United States should contain China because there's no political cost to doing it. Now, both of these views are highly problematic, and as I argue in my book, China's reality is somewhere in the middle. If we are guided or misguided by these two extreme views, we will lose the opportunity to work with the Chinese leadership, which will hurt US interests. It would be a huge mistake to conclude that any of Xi Jinping's policy decisions, domestic or international, are predetermined or made in isolation. It would be even more dangerous for US policymakers to assume that a major confrontation or even a war with China is inevitable. It is still too early, in my view, to make a definitive judgment about Xi Jinping's intentions, political savvy, and historical legacy. Now, this leads me to my second point. I just criticized the existing views, so what's my view about Xi Jinping? Now, my understanding and assessment of Xi Jinping, as the book argues, is one of the most intriguing and complex world leaders in our time. In the past 4 years, he has surprised so many people and has made a number of drastic changes, particularly anti-corruption campaign and military reforms. Now, but the three crucial questions have not been sufficiently or adequately addressed in the China study communities overseas. Number one, what caused these changes? Number two, how could these changes have occurred? And number three, are these changes temporary or long-term? Now, let me very quickly answer each of them. We really have short memories. People tend to forget what China looked like 4 years ago before Xi Jinping came to power. Corruption was completely out of control. Political scandal occurred one after another. Communist Party was really in danger. We talk about corruption, it's not like just $1 million. This is really billion, 10 billion. There's so many cases involve 10 billion US dollars. I remember that I wrote an article about 6 years ago, talk about the railroad minister, his name Zhang Shuguang. Chinese government found his bank account in Switzerland and the United States, totaling 2.8 billion US dollars. My friend at Goldman Sachs wrote to me, sent me email, said, Cheng Li, you must be wrong. And the highest could be just 2.8 billion Chinese yuan. But I was right, he was wrong. Later, Chinese reaffirmed that number. His boss, Chinese government never released, the data about how much he'd stolen. But he has a nickname. This is Minister Liu Zijun, called Mr. 4%. In every railroad deal, he got 4%. But we should remember that in 2009, China adopted a stimulus plan totaling 600 billion US dollars. According to Chinese economists, 45% of them used in the railroad. He got 4% in that single year, 2008, 2009. Now, these things you need to be stopped. Secondly, that China's political system becomes so fragmented. 9 members of standing committee, each of them have their bureaucracy. Particularly noticeable for the police chief, Zhou Yongkang, that notorious guy, very corrupt guy. He controlled the law and enforcement, hijacked the Chinese leadership. So the system failed. And also, China's military became increasingly disobeying. They tried to challenge the civilian leadership. Even in 2008, the Sichuan earthquake, Premier Wen Jiabao almost cry in front of national TV, begging China's military send a troop to earthquake zones to help the the people. He said that people feed you, not you feed the people. Don't forget, but military is still so slow. So military is on the verge of becoming its own boss, become kingmaker if we do not stop that. So these things help Xi Jinping. And also there's one factor. Because of some scandals really undermine Hu Jintao's credibility. So the Power Bill Standing Committee, he got 6 versus 1 factional ratio majority. Premier Li Keqiang belonged to Hu Jintao's coalition, only stand alone by himself. But Xi Jinping, including himself, has 6 seats in the Power Bill Standing Committee. That explains that he could have so much power. His political allies in this top leadership really support him, partly to save Chinese Communist Party, partly to fix some of the problems, and partly to protect their own political coalition. Now, let's look at Xi Jinping. I think that he is a man of contradictions. This could go to his background, his many other things, his worldviews, but let me just focus on policies. On economic market reform, as we know that he launched the so-called third platinum 1 year after he became top leader in 2013. This is the most reform-minded blueprint, although it's probably not fully implemented. But the plan itself is very market-oriented. But at the same time, Xi Jinping talked we should support state-owned enterprises to make sure they will continue to be the national champion, make it bigger and stronger. And also, the foreign companies, like some of you probably now experience some difficulties in China. And particularly, foreign IT companies really have the difficulty. It has a lot of bias against them. So you see the contradiction. Right. Now look at he's on the political front. Xi Jinping, many people, particularly Chinese intellectuals or some other foreign scholars, think that he's very much anti-intellectual. Or anti-intellectualism is like the brand name of Xi Jinping. But on the other hand, Xi Jinping, more than any leader in China's CCP's history, emphasized the role of think tanks. He even say think tank development should be a national strategy. As we know, think tanks by definition consist of intellectuals. So this is another contradiction. Now, Xi Jinping is very candid or very critical about the so-called color revolutions, and also his policies on the foreign NGO laws, which is adopted just a couple of years ago or just more recently, really make a lot of people very nervous or concerned, especially international foreign communities. But also interestingly enough, Xi Jinping met twice the Burmese leader Aung San Suu Kyi, a very symbol of the color revolution. Also, a few years ago, I wrote a book about the tobacco control anti-smoking campaign. The first lady, Chinese first lady, Xi Jinping's wife, is really the driving force, along with Bill Gates Foundation, to reduce the smokers in China. And she played a very, very important role in AIDS prevention, AIDS orphans, and many social causes. So this is a very strong input on the foreign NGOs' work. Now, on rule of law, we heard so much about harassment of human rights lawyers, arrests, 200, maybe more. But at the same time, Xi Jinping, under his watch, Chinese Communist Party devoted 1 platinum, it never happened before, to talk about the importance of constitution. Now, of course, there's a lot of ambiguous at the moment. Sometimes they think constitution should be above the party. Sometimes the party should be above the constitution. But it's natural. You look at our history. Look at the UK's history. BBC has a wonderful series about the British democracy. It's really quite also, the whole process is very long. And a lot of, up and downs. So how could you expect China will move towards a constitutional democracy or even constitutionalism in a short period of time, right? But these ambiguities open the door for contention. Now, in terms of the major power relations, of course, that we are concerned about Xi Jinping's personal friendship with Putin. But when Xi Jinping used the term major power relations, he does not refer to Russia. He refers to United States. Now, on Asian Pacific security, Xi Jinping once said, Asia belongs to Asia. But a few months later, he said, Asia Pacific is big enough to have two major powers, United States and China, to coexist. Contradictions. Now, it is arguably Xi Jinping's contradictions that make him a well-rounded and effective leader. I think Oscar Wilde once said, ordinary people contradict others. Smart people contradict themselves. So I don't know whether Xi Jinping is really smart or not, but at least he tried. Because in a country so divided, you need to position yourself. Of course, some of the contradictions are temporary. Sooner or later, he needs to address some of the issues. Some of the contradictions it is also reasonable for Xi Jinping to spend a few years to try to find the best sequences in which to implement his agenda, maximize public support, and accumulating political capital. So when he has this political capital, he will tell us how he will use it. Now, the last question about whether it's temporary or long-term, my answer is temporary. This leads to my third issue, the central argument of the book. Despite the continuation of the one-party rule, Chinese leadership is not a monolithic group. Over the past 3 decades, the CCP has actually continually sought a new mechanism, institutional regulations, political norms, and the policy measures to resolve its inherent deficiencies. China's collective leadership model, with its internal checks and balances, which I call one party, two coalitions, borrowing Deng Xiaoping's one country, two systems, really far more enduring or sustainable than many overseas analysts believe. Now, let me very quickly to talk about these institutional norms. One is age limit. Last Party Congress, anyone who were born in 1944 or earlier retire. In the next Party Congress, I assume, will be the same. Anyone who were born in 1949 or earlier retire. You will not be qualified for Central Committee. When you are not qualified for Central Committee, you will never be the Politburo or Politburo Standing Committee because you need to be in the first one, right? This is one. Term limits. Any leader should only have 2 terms on one particular position or 3 terms in the same level of leadership position. There's also regional representation or bureaucratic representation. Each province or provincial level entity, like Shanghai, Tianjin, Beijing, Chongqing, each will have 4 members of Central Committee, except Tibet and Xinjiang may have 3 or 4. This is Chinese affirmative action. Now, of course, after the Party Congress, they can rotate. But during the Party Congress, in past 15 years or so, always follow that norm, my study indicate. And finally, there are elections in China, limited, but still elections, which means if you want to elect 210 full members of Central Committee, you will put 230 people on the ballot. The bottom 20 will be eliminated. The same thing with the alternate members. If you want to elect 170, you put 195 on the ballots. The last 25 or 10%, around 10% will be eliminated. Now, with this limited democracy or inter-party democracy, you really make the competition become part of the political system and eliminate some of the notorious or unpopular leaders, even within the political establishment. also, when you look at the Chinese political system, despite all these crises, problems, deficiencies, we should remember China already had, in the past 15 years or so, two peaceful, orderly, institutionalized generational transition of power. First from Jiang to Hu in 2002, and from Hu to Xi in 2012. Now, transition is not only generational, but also sociological. China also made a transition twice, not once, over the past 3 decades. First, from the traditional communist to technocrats, engineer-turned politicians. Then, more recently, from technocrats to economic managers, entrepreneurs, and yes, lawyers even. Now, these are significant. Of course, people may be cynical, but this occupational, kind of openness, leave the door open, explain why the Communist Party could survive. So the system is not, like people said, so stagnant. It has components, very dynamic. And also that the Communist Party not purely resisted change. Of course, they resisted some change, but not entirely resist change. Rather, they want to select some changes. Now, to conclude, I want to quote Winston Churchill. From my presentation, you know that I'm quite optimistic, more so even than my Chinese colleagues. But I want to quote Winston Churchill. He made a comparison between pessimist and optimist. He said pessimist sees calamity in every opportunity. Optimist sees opportunity in every calamity. Now, past 4 years, regardless whether we like Xi Jinping or not, he proved to be an optimist. Why we, international community, should also see there's a possibility China will move to a direction in our interest, in the interest of the humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Li. We'll take questions now. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Wait for the microphone. I will call on you. And please make sure your question is a question and not a comment. We have one in the back in the middle.
Hi, thank you, Professor Li, for your wonderful talk. I just wonder if you could make some predictions on the U.S.-China relations based on the different turnouts of the U.S. election. Thank you.
Well, again, it's a moment of course, that Hillary Clinton's policy, if she becomes the president, you will see more continuation. And, but in certain issue areas that she could be more forthcoming, for example, human rights, women's rights, and also, as we know, the pivotal policy is really linked to her team early on. But on the other hand, there's a lot of misunderstanding in China about Hillary Clinton. Actually, I worked for her in the 2008 campaign. And at that time, she actually, it's not that badly received back in China, but later there's a lot of misunderstanding. Just to give you an example, someone said that she wanted to contain China. And, but just give you two or three examples. One is when she was Secretary of State, she really pushed for the American pavilion of the Shanghai World Expo. Without her personal input, there will be no American pavilion in Shanghai. This is not a person, if she's anti-China, as some Chinese believe. Secondly, she also pushed very forcefully for the 100,000 strong program, students exchange with China. And he has a wonderful team, campaign team, now, they are very knowledgeable about China, and think that we will see more continuity. And I hope the Chinese misperception, misunderstanding of her will be modified. For Donald Trump, of course, that we do not know much about his foreign policy. But the Chinese, you can imagine, were very happy if we stopped, the withdraw U.S. troops, in Asia, stop that U.S.-Japan, strong tie alliance, and etc. And particularly, certainly Japanese are very, very nervous at this point. But the thing is that sophisticated Chinese also understand that some of the policies, if changed too abruptly, China will suffer greatly, especially on the economic policy at the moment, but of course security policy as well. And so, again, it depends on who you ask. Based on my observation, many people in the foreign establishment in China are very much concerned about the uncertainty, especially if Donald Trump got elected. But on the other hand, I just want to mention that some of the surveys we got is not that reliable, not really scientific based in my view. But just based on my reading and non-scientific, kind of sentiment, I think Chinese probably are quite divided as well.
We have another one over there in the middle, by the aisle.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheng, for such a wonderful talk, and welcome to Chicago. I totally agree with you. I think one thing why Chinese politics is so fascinating is there are so many paradoxes and contradictions. And the one thing I have noticed is something you didn't really talk in your presentation, but I wonder if something in your book is actually about the central-local relations. Because although China is considered as a centralized state, and as you have shown, the central leadership is very strong, at the same time, we do see that the local autonomy at both the provincial level and the municipal levels are very strong. Some people even say Chinese mayors have more power than, mayors in a federalist system. So I wonder what is your insights on the issue of central-local relations in China specifically. So how the central party system, how Xi and his colleagues actually exercise the control to the provincial and the municipal level, despite the great autonomy they have given to the leaders at those levels?
Excellent question. Certainly in my book, I just spent a lot of time talking about central-local relations. And in my argument, local demand for representative government in terms of resources allocation and elite representation constitute a very important force for collective leadership. Now, also that we should remember 4 or 5 years ago, there's a lot of concern about the inaction of the, rightly or wrongly, about the Hu Jintao administration. The popular saying is the political order cannot extend beyond the Zhongnanhai. Local disobey, it's quite strong, resistance quite strong. Now, when you look at Xi Jinping's power, one thing is quite remarkable, is that he has a unique link. His career largely advanced in the coast region, especially from Fujian, Zhejiang, and Shanghai, the most prosperous, the economically advanced the region. But at the same time, he has a very strong root in inland China, especially his father's birthplace in Shanxi, and also where he spent 7 years as a settled-down youth during the Cultural Revolution. So that linkage gave him tremendous connection and with both inland and the coastal region. And also, he's one of the most important confidant, Li Zhansu, I think he will be probably a standing committee member. He had work experience in 4 different parts of China, the provinces, in the north, in the northeast, in the south, and in the west. That make him really well connected. But the Chinese political system, just very much our bipartisan system, sometimes will have the natural kind of balance of power. When you become too powerful, the other forces will come together naturally, try to counterbalance. So that process, no one can control. You can enhance your proteges, your followers, your like-minded people, but you cannot absolutely control either Power Bureau Standing Committee or Power Bureau, certainly not in the Central Committee. So that makes the Chinese system, more pluralistic. There's limited checks and balances, actually quite dynamic. So that's the force of the local demand. And it's not for like independence, there's no such a sentiment, but for policy, allocation, social justice, and also in terms of the development, central government funding and resources allocation. These are all legitimate concerns. So that's the driving force for so-called collective leadership.
We have the gentleman, third row.
Hi. So earlier in your talk, you mentioned the term zero-sum game. So when it comes to the future of the United States and China, I'm just wondering what your personal point of view is on whether they can continue to peacefully exist indefinitely.
Well, I'm also optimistic. I don't think that the United States and China have completely different ideological stance, like the Cold War. Cold War is either I prevail you, my ideas prevail you, or your idea prevail, us. But now there's cultural differences. There's differences in the political system, but it's not like this kind of contentious. In reality, we see a lot of exchanges, particularly the younger generation. Many of the audience are here, and including myself. I came here 30 years ago as a student. I now become an American citizen. In my blood, I certainly still have Chinese inheritance. You will never, get away, get out of these things. But on the other hand, I embrace American democracy, human rights, the values which I share, embrace, that make me as American as well. So I think that we're in a position for those Chinese Americans to really play an important role as a bridge. But at the same time, I always feel that maybe I come from the two countries, probably the most arrogant country in the world, China and the United States. Usually we have a so-called American exceptionalism, really just talk about all others, that's just, they're wrong, but we are right, we're Chinese or Americans. So I think it's important to change that attitude in today's world. Now, in the global issues, we have so many common interests, will be economic rebalancing, financial stability, and climate change, anti-terrorism, refugee issues, and you name it. And but in the regional, certainly there's tensions in South China Sea, East China Sea. Yes, South China Sea may relate with natural resources or navigation, which China really want to secure. United States certainly have every right to be involved to protect American interests. But in East China Sea, this is a piece of rocks. Some of my friends said that we hope that global warming will be quick enough to make it a non-issue, right? And so again, it's so bizarre. We just caught up with ignore the common interest. Basically, economic globalization or modern technology, telecommunication change virtually everything except our mindset. We should not go with this 19th century or Cold War mentality. And what Chinese or what Westerners call the Thucydides trap, right? And what changed? If American economy is doing poorly, China suffer, and vice versa. And Secretary Clinton actually said we should really benefit from each other's success. I hope that message will continue if she becomes the president. So the danger is one incident lead to another. And so I always argument that if U.S. and China really engage in a major conflict or a war, it's not so much about ideology. It's not so much about conflict interest, but really the misperception, misjudgment, And so that's why we need to have communication. We need to have such a forum, wonderful forum, to really help us understand each other. We should have more Chinese guests, and our scholars should go to China. This is what's happening all the time. In a way, reduce that problem. Now, we only look at the dangerous seas, but we forget there's friendly skies. Every day, 10,000 passengers fly one way to the other. It's not like 1989 when I first returned to China. The airplane only had 5 or 6 people after 1989 Tiananmen. So why we do not look at these kind of issues? And again, China's economic opening is very, very important to us. Of course, there's a previous opportunities may reduce in the manufacturing, in terms of foreign investment, but now China has money. China's manufacturing is really very mature. But the service sector, environment, protection products, education, public health, especially public health area, tourism, it just start to open. We, United States, has advantage in this area. So of course, we should push China to continue to open. And good things is China in the G20 acknowledged the overcapacity issue. They want to reduce these kind of steel or cement production. But again, this is through international communities' collective effort to make sure that China is doing right things. The same things. Chinese companies also have legitimate reason to access the US market. Yes, if there's some issues with national security, we should be careful, but a lot of companies are nothing to do with security. Movie theater. I don't see that Van Das purchase a movie theater will undermine American security. I just do not get it. So again, the openness should be two-way around. So through our openness, we can also make sure China will do the same thing. And so I think that, again, the conflict should be avoided and must be avoided.
All the way in the back.
Maybe the greatest thing about doing business that's really fundamental is trust. One of the things that would really improve it would be if China would loosen up on telling people who own the businesses, which seems to be a tough hurdle. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think it takes the next regime, or do you think it's a closed book?
You raise an excellent question. It's trust. It's what your value, Chinese value, really what they stand for. How your rise, historical rise, will not at others' expense. What you represent. And so again, there's a serious discussion in China about the social norm, ethics, belief system. Again, I don't want to make my presentation sounds like a Chinese system is great. No, it's not my point. The point is I'm talking about with American audience, usually too cynical about China. I wanted to look at the other side. But for Chinese audience, I actually think that they have a lot of things to fix. On the top of that is the value system. They should rebuild. Without the value system, you cannot really trust other people, domestically, internationally. But when you start to be against the universal value, I think you just isolate yourself. I mean, there are some values should be shared by everyone, but that does not mean that you should not have your own uniqueness. But I think that the hope that the Chinese leadership will rethink about its stance on universal value. At least Premier Wen Jiabao talk about, he believes universal values. And I hope that some other leaders will also think that way, not think that in a way that they're all conspiracies against China. Then you can build up more trust and long-term friendship rather than just the pure interest.
Okay, we have another one, same location.
Hi. You had indicated, or you've given a number of reasons why it's beneficial to China and the United States for the political leadership, to work together and have a positive relationship. But then you also indicated that the military leadership in China may be somewhat different or a little bit in opposition to the political leadership. So does the military leadership in China view their relationship with the United States in the same way that the political leadership in China does?
Excellent question. In general, military leaders are more hawkish. But what Xi Jinping did last year, the military reform is really quite remarkable. No one actually predicted that. The whole military reform will take 5 years to complete. The most difficult part actually was already completed in 6 months, which he basically changed the military structure. He deleted or eliminated 4 departments as a way to, between Central Military Commission and the military services and the military districts, and reduce military districts, and establish the supporting force and make a Navy and Air Force more important. But he did that in such a quick, effective, and balanced way. But on top of that, he really surprised many people. He fired a person called Liu Yuan. This is a person I personally call him Bo Xilai in the military. It's very anti-US. It's extremely nationalistic. Has a potential to become kingmaker. He was Xi Jinping's good friend, but he also helped Xi Jinping to get rid of the major tigers in the military. But that person has his own political ambition. That person was a civilian in origin, but joined the People's Liberation Army, actually the armed police force, when he was 41 years old. Become military, PLA, joined the PLA actually when he was 51 years old. So that in the military, Chinese military establishment considered no, it's an outsider. So he had more enemies than friends in the military. That's actually a liability. So Xi Jinping so decisively to remove him. And so that tells you that Xi Jinping wanted to have a very balanced approach. On one hand, I think it's a good thing civilian leadership control the military, even for the United States or outside the world. Otherwise, you have a mess. But of course, we want to make sure that China's military modernization will really not target or not undermine our strengths or the security of the other China's neighbors. But this should be more transparent. And the new military leadership has already started to emerge. And there's a lot of male-to-male dialogue. It just happened just a few days ago in Xiangshan, called Xiangshan meeting in Beijing. There are a lot of foreign military generals and Chinese dialogue. There's also Shangri-La dialogue. And also there's a regular Air Force, Navy, and visits. So I hope that should be enhanced. And I also hope that the future military leaders should be more cosmopolitan orientated in terms of how to understand the consequences of modern warfare. And so in a way that the military reform is basically moving away from Russia style to American style. This itself may be good for China's communication with the outside world as well.
Second row, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk. My question is, do you believe that there can be meaningful cooperation between China and the U.S. on issues such as human rights, trade, without the two leaders of each country first resolving their differences over security issues such as the South China Sea and U.S. military presence in the region?
I think that, of course, that China needs to improve human rights. When you see this kind of news, certainly it's quite disturbing. But having said that, we also should be aware there's tremendous progress in this area over the past 30 years. Human rights, when I was in China, it's a taboo topic. It's a negative term. It's a quote unquote, but the quote is now gone. It's become a real positive words. And, but it will take some time to implement. But I think when we talk about China, about human rights, we should do it in a very careful and respectful way. It's your best interest to improve human rights. We talk to you not to show our superiority, but rather to share with our own lessons. This is the most effective way to do it. In terms of trade, of course that United States and China have tremendous cooperation in this area. Both markets are so huge. And so all these things should not be at the expense of the security issues. So good things is the United States and China under the Obama administration, they're altogether about the 96 dialogue mechanism, cover virtually almost every topic, including cyberspace cooperation. And certainly there's some human rights dialogue also going on. But the time we just lecture China on human rights, lecture China how wonderful our democracy is, it's not effective, most effective way. We can emphasize something different. Despite all the problem, you also should see the validity, the good part of our democracy, transparency. And again, ultimately, a democracy is a process. There's no perfect things. They're always working on that. So in my view, that we currently problem we United States face is democracy has some problem. But in China, its lack of democracy causes tremendous problems. So it's a different nature of the problems. Although human nature, at the same time, politicians are quite similar. You know, when I look at this debate, when I look at these scandals, I mean, constantly remind me some of the things in China. You know, so in that regard, I think that it's so similar. I mean, I don't want to say something
Go
too
ahead,
strong.
please. All the way in the back.
Yes, I just wondered if there's to be a reduction in the amount of, say, corporate hacking, theft of intellectual property, et cetera, from U.S. companies, how would that be accomplished? By legal means only? Is there a voluntary process? Are they clamping down on that?
Nowadays, in this area, we heard more about Russia than China, right?
About the corporate side.
Corporate side, I think actually is reduced based on my sources. It's largely because President Obama really wanted to emphasize. He also emphasized in the 6-hour discussion with Xi Jinping about that area as well, and about the commercial espionage and intellectual property rights and etc. Of course, the Chinese always said that some of the issues are local government or some other companies. But I think that in general, I do believe that the Chinese government is its own interest to crack down some of the wrong behaviors. So it's on the way, probably the speed, and it's not as we hope, but it's significantly reduced compared with 3 or 4 years ago. But again, when we look at our own problem, look at the Snowden, the movie, Chinese will start to wonder a lot of things.
In the middle.
Very nice meeting you, Dr. Li. My question is, what is Xi's plan to tackle the environmental problems in China, and what are some areas of opportunities to cooperate with the United States on issues of global warming and environment in general?
Well, it's an excellent question. Now, this certainly tells you that if Donald Trump becomes president, that the dialogue will be over. That's for sure. If Hillary Clinton is president, that dialogue will continue, probably even reach. But it's a remarkable achievement to look at China and United States. push for change to reduce the, the air pollution and to contribute to, help the climate. So again, this is already a landmark development to leading countries, the two most polluted countries, wanted to deal with the issue in a serious manner, right? So I think that I applaud President Xi Jinping and President Obama for that really great achievement. But we want to make sure that fully implemented. And when you look at China, I'm not so cynical, because environmental pollution is no longer just the issue of pollution, no longer economic issue. It's already become social political issue. When it becomes social political issue, you got to be serious. And also talk about local leaders, that's also very clear. Future leaders' promotion, not just the GDP growth, but also green GDPs. So that's important policy move on the Chinese side. Right. So I'm quite optimistic in this area. I hope that the next administration will continue to engage with China, and the Paris agreement will be implemented in a meaningful way.
All the way on the side, yes. The side, please. The gentleman, yeah, at the edge.
What role do you see, if any, that the Pakistan-Washington relationship will play? And what role do you envision for the India and Pakistan to play in the US-China relationship under the two different presidents? Possibilities here.
Wow, that's a tough question. Actually, Hillary Clinton has been very much interested in China, India, and United States relations. And I think you come from Pakistan, right? And, or India, could you say? Yeah, from India. So again, she has been, particularly when she was Secretary of State, she's very much involved in that development. And there's a lot of meetings, second tracks, dialogue going on. And I think Modi and Xi Jinping, they may not be best friends, but they respect each other. That also help. But again, I do not know Donald Trump in that regard. And so that's a wild card. I really feel uncomfortable to comment. But there must be some other top issues we should be concerned when you come with, if he become president, and for that issue. Yeah.
We have a question here, second row, please.
Despite the existence of the so-called Great Red Firewall, the reality of the matter is more and more Chinese have been exposed to culture and ideas outside of China, whether it be tourism, students studying overseas, now Chinese executives moving overseas because it's all the significant outbound investment. So with Chinese people being exposed more and more to just different ideas and concepts, how does the Chinese government manage that, deal with that? And do they view that as a threat? Or how do they actually manage this situation whereby there's more outside ideas entering China?
This is exactly addressed in the last chapter of my book. I'm optimistic of China only partially with the leadership structure or mechanism, but mainly because societal forces, including middle class, entrepreneurial class, commercialized media, legal professional communities, NGOs, both domestic and foreign. Now, we may ask, people always compare with the Bo Xilai incident with the 1989 Tiananmen. But the difference is 1989 Tiananmen caused a decade-long isolation and affect the Chinese economy, society very, very negatively. But the Bo-Xilai case did not. The reason is because Chinese society became very mature. The forces I just mentioned did not exist in 1989, or extremely weak, but now they are quite dynamic. You are absolutely right that the past 30 years, China basically, as many of the Chinese audience probably will agree with me, China or Chinese people just want to learn from the West. Not only science, technology, but also norms and values. The most popular talk show, late night talk show, is by a transgender woman called Jinping. She studied in the United States. She is was a ballet dancer, still a ballet dancer. But that's basically her talk show. It's so similar to our late night show. Now, she is careful not to talk about too much about politics. But what she discusses is really American values, or cosmopolitan values, or middle-class values. The other popular talk show host is called Zhou Libo, also from Shanghai. He has a nickname, China's Jay Leno. Jay Leno was in Chicago before, or Jay Leno?
Jay Leno.
Yeah, where he is? Oh, Los Angeles, yeah. And, but he imitates Chinese leaders, and sometimes could be very bold to be criticized. Now, these all reflect the middle-class culture start to emerge. Now, the relationship between middle class and Chinese leadership is a complicated one. Today's allies could be tomorrow's rivals. So Chinese Communist Party should be very careful. But it's fair to say Chinese middle class, Chinese intellectuals, they are quite nationalistic. I mean, why they're not? So in general, they don't want China enter a chaotic period. So we should keep that in mind. So that's why I think the two extreme views I described early on really will hurt the US interests. Because public opinion in China can change very quickly. And the particular nationalist sentiment is always important. Just like in the United States, we also have nationalist sentiment. Otherwise, we cannot explain this presidential campaign. We cannot explain what happened in Europe. So again, to answer your question is that yes, I mean, that you really address so many things. This is a dynamic situation which will make Xi Jinping and any other leaders, they should go along with the increasingly pluralistic society rather than go against. When you have this kind of, interest or interest group of politics, you have to have a more representative government. You should really have a more team of rivals in the leadership to reach out to different sectors in society. So that's the very powerful reason why I think that Xi Jinping will improve the collective leadership rather than replace it. Because the odds against him to replace it is so huge. So you raise a very, very important question. My last chapter really addressed that issue.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking Dr. Lee.
Thank you so much. Thank you
and
so much.
he will sign the books at the table.
Okay.